It's been 25 years since the release of Soul Reaver and Soul Reaver 2. And now at long last we have remasters. So how do these bad boys hold up after so many years? Did they stand the test of time, or did they belong to the abyss? Let's find out. When it comes to the Legacy of Kain, it's a unique series. Blood Omen, the first in this tale of betrayal, vengeance, and philosophy, kicked everything off with a fun Zelda-like action-adventure game where you have a cornucopia of spells to kill your enemies with, a giant soul-eating sword, and the ability to drink blood telekinetically. Super cool. You played Kain as he trekked across the land of Nosgoth, uncovering conspiracies and unraveling a plot that could shake the foundations of the world itself.
Now be gone!
I had crossed death for this moment. My mind was empty save for one thought. I would kill.
Years later, we get Soul Reaver. Set a millennium after Blood Omen, Kain is now a god emperor of Nosgoth, ruling the land with an iron claw as he dominated Nosgoth with his trusty lieutenants. Raziel, our character throughout this adventure, was Kain's right-hand man until his ego got the better of him, and what follows is legendarily one of the greatest, if not the greatest, opening cinematics of all time, showing Raziel's fall from grace, gorgeously remastered here.
To suffer the fate of traitors and weaklings, to burn forever in the bowels of the lake of the dead.
Cast him in.
What follows is a Shakespearean melodrama between a father and his fallen son in a quest to take vengeance and uncover the mysteries of a destroyed and corrupted Nosgoth. The narrative is the best part about this entire series. All of the original audio is retained and had a bit of an upgrade. The audio has been brought up to a nice 2024 standard and sounds great with a nice pair of headphones or from your speakers. Lots of the cast has sadly passed away since these games were released, so it warms my heart to see their voices have been treated with such love.
Redeem yourself. Or if you prefer, avenge yourself. Settle your dispute with Kain. Destroy him and your brethren. Free their souls and let the wheel of fate churn again. Use your hatred to reave their souls. I can make it possible. Become my Soul Reaver, my angel of death.
It's also great to see that the dynamic music that was lost on the PC version and the Dreamcast version, I believe, someone correct me if I'm wrong, dynamic music is a common thing today. But Soul Reaver was one of the first to do it, setting the bar for the industry. Kurt Harland of Information Society and Jim Hedges have composed masterful atmosphere here, making Nosgoth feel just as grounded as ever. The gameplay in Soul Reaver 1 and 2 is no slouch. Keep in mind, though, that these games are 25 years old, and like all things, they adhered to that era of the PlayStation 1 and the PlayStation 2. So while they might seem like small for today's massive open-world games that are 100 gigabytes, these were considered huge back then. Soul Reaver made waves technology-wise by having a system to keep the game free of loading screens, a seamless experience. Trust me, it was a huge deal back then, and Digital Foundry did an entire episode about it. They're a great tech-tuber channel. Soul Reaver takes a pseudo-open world approach in that you have a linear path to X or Y destination pretty much, but everything is circular. So while you might start in one area, if you explore enough, you'll end up in another. Think of Soul Reaver as a Zelda-like with a bit of Metroid approach as well as the block puzzles of Tomb Raider. This was the 90s after all. You explore, unlock an ability, and then you have access to a new area. Combat here is simple yet freeing. You are in a world of vampires, and with that comes ways to kill them all differently. Water, sunlight, stakes, etc. It never gets old messing with these enemies, and the experimentation is a delight. Soul Reaver 2 is about the exact same experience, though it does have a fair more amount of backtracking, and combat, while less varied, is still great. Going from a dark post-apocalyptic world to Nosgoth in its prime is simply awe-inspiring, but I won't spoil much here for you new players. Now, this is a remaster, so how about those visuals? Well, if you've played the Tomb Raider trilogy recently, it's about the same level of quality here. Models for enemies and characters have been all lovingly brought up to 2024 to make this PS1 game feel like a lost PS2 game, and the actual PS2 game feel like a end-of-life cycle PS2 game rather than a launch title. The texture work to the levels is great, keeping the original look while simply making it look more crisp. Rocks look like rocks, pipes look like pipes. Instead of the idea that is there, you actually get these looks. I will say a small complaint is that the look of Soul Reaver 2, because it actually has a great art style originally, and the texture work is great in those updates, it does feel a bit too clean in my opinion. Soul Reaver 1 though, it adds to that atmosphere of that game, and it does bring that PS1 game feeling up to a nice little upgrade. Lighting also looks almost untouched, given how it didn't actually exist back then, and you had to bake in shadows or actually draw them on the model. But now we actually have some form of lighting here. Character shadows instead of the idea of shadows. Torches produce a light, the Reaver produces a light, you'll be covered in shadow where you'd expect to be, and a day-night cycle that was cut from the original version of Soul Reaver has made its return, and while you might not really notice a difference depending on the area, it does add a little bit of extra kick to this dark world that Nosgoth needs. Raziel's model is wonderful. Part of these remasters is to preserve the originals. You can swap on the fly back and forth between the remastered look and the original look, and it looks like the devs chose the PS1 version of Raziel to base the color off of here, while bringing in elements of the cinematic look, and a nice little merging of the two, but I do wish Raziel was a bit more blue. And I think Kain should be a bit less gold. I said this in another video, but if the devs were trying to one-to-one match the cinematic look, then they should look to the Hilden Lord, a longtime community member who did some texture mods for these characters. Or maybe we'll just get a reworking of those same texture mods by him later on down the line as a mod, which would be just fine. I'm not a fan of the new look for Mobius, unfortunately, and I did finally, after 25 years of playing these characters and playing these games back to back to back, and now because these characters are such in high fidelity, when the camera is pulled back and they are supposed to be talking, their mouths don't move. They added subtle mouth movement in Soul Reaver 1 to the characters, so I would love to see a small patch that does the same thing, simply to add the idea of talking when the camera is pulled back rather than nothing at all. You can clearly see it because these characters are so high fidelity. It is a bit distracting, and it does feel a bit dated for its time. These are small nitpicks, however, and won't break the game at all, of course. Preservation is important, so I do think that's what they are going for as well. Preserving sort of the base look for these models, so when you do swap to them back and forth at the click of a button, your brain doesn't freak out and melt. All the enemies are nice and crisp, and what was a blurry idea of chainmail, for example, is now actual chainmail. The hint of gross veins on a giant spider boss are now actual gross veins on a giant spider boss. Everything here has weight, and you can feel the ooze dripping off of some of these enemies. The remastered visuals are wonderful overall, and naturally others will differ in opinion on this front. These remasters also bring in some popular elements like a photo mode that, yes, I will be taking hundreds of screenshots with. A map for Soul Reaver 1 and an updated one for Soul Reaver 2 are also here, keeping it consistent across titles, as well as a nice little nod to Blood Omen's map if you did just come off of that game before starting these. The compass from Soul Reaver 2 shows up in Soul Reaver 1, and if you don't want any of these, of course, you can simply switch them off in the menu options. They even updated the controls to feel more modern. Oh, and yes, you absolutely should be playing this with a controller, even if you are on PC. Apart from all of these visual upgrades and changes, the devs have decided to add a bunch of bonus material as well. All of the stuff from Soul Reaver 2 has been re-included, a bunch of fan art and cosplay stuff is here as well, but most importantly, the lost levels. The legendarily cut content is now back in-game, and although it's not part of the main game and it sort of functions as a virtual museum, it is still great to see. There has been a lot of love put into this remaster. Soul Reaver holds a special place within the industry of video games, and it's great to see they formed a super team made of community members to work on these remasters, to give them some love and care they deserve. So is this remaster worth your $20? Absolutely. You get 2 great classics brought up to today's standards, and while they aren't perfect, you owe it to yourself to experience the story of Raziel in the land of Nosgoth. The coin has landed on his edge, as some would say, and now we can only hope that the other games in this series get the same treatment. Given how every other project that they've released with before these remasters, like the comic book, has garnered over $1 million and incredible fan hype, I'm pretty sure that there is a resurgence to this series. With all that said, I've been Calypso, and I will see you in the next one.
Yourself, Cain. There are only 2 sides to your coin.
Apparently so. But suppose you throw a coin enough times. Suppose one day it lands on its edge.